Recording in progress.
All right. We all ready? Good evening. It is now 6 o'clock, and I will call to order the Airport Commission meeting for December 7th, 2023. The first order on the agenda is roll call. Claudia, could you please do that?
Yes. Commissioner Perry? McGaw?
Here.
Sasser?
Present.
Margand?
Here.
Dietrich?
Present.
Domich?
Here.
Councilmember Now?
Here.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is general public comment. Dan, I don't believe we had any, do we? We don't have any comment cards, so we will move on to the next item on the agenda, which is presentations. And we don't have any presentations. So the next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes. Does everyone had a chance to review? And does anyone have any changes they would like?
I do. There was just one typo I saw, and it's about a bid package. And it says big package instead of bid package. And I'm sorry, I don't know if I can find it. I think it was about maybe hangar 2, Claudia? Yeah, thank you. If you just look for the word big on the document, you should be able to find it. Okay, thank you.
Does anyone else have any changes? Okay, with that one change from Commissioner Sasser, we will consider the minutes approved. The next item on the agenda is public hearings and matters for consideration, and there is just one item, and that is discussion on adding an airworthiness requirement to the hangar allocation policy and hangar license agreement. And I believe that was a request by, oh, actually, I know it was a request by Commissioner Domich, so I will turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess I'll just ask Dan real quick, because I know that there was I think the last meeting, there were two termination notices that had gone out. So sometime between the last meeting and now, so maybe if you can give us an update on that. But I know we had a discussion about new licenses. And there's actually a lot of people, and probably I'd say most of the ones that would be issues are still on the old leases from, potentially 15 years ago.
That's correct. It would only apply to new licenses for those. Same thing with minimum standards. It only applies to agreements that were, it's not retroactive.
So this isn't, so this lease isn't renewed on an annual basis? So if I sign my lease license today, I'm going to be working off the same terms and conditions in that agreement as long as I maintain good standing 20 years from now?
Yes, however, from time to time, we will request a tenant to relicense their hangar. In example, a lot of our agreements are leases by name. They're called leases. They're from the older system. And so we will actually replace those with licenses on occasion.
I apologize. Isn't item 4 that after the end of the term, it goes month to month? So wouldn't every lease that is 10, 20 years old be on a month-to-month basis at this point for item 4 of the lease agreement?
Was the question what the term for the agreement?
Yeah, so item 4 on the copy that we have is that the term of this agreement shall be on a month-to-month basis commencing on, and then there's a date.
So some of the agreements can be given a date. Most of them, almost every single hangar license is a month-to-month agreement.
So that means that with 30 days' notice, it's going to be canceled.
That is correct. And if you also read section 9, the city can terminate for convenience. So there's no, we don't have to put in a particular requirement. So we already have a mechanism there. If we had a tenant that just wasn't using their hangar appropriately, let's just put in that category. And we talked to them about it several times. We can,
I think that was the question, right?
Yep.
Is like,
Yeah, so how do we, if we have no way, so how do we, with council's approval, they've said whatever the terminology we've decided, so it addresses what we needed to, protects those that we needed to. How do we implement it? Because based on what you just said to me, those 4 hangars with those aircraft that have been sitting there, there's really nothing we could do. That's the impression I'm getting, is because their lease agreement or agreement is there, it's set, we can't make changes to it that would impact
well,
it.
we can't change their agreement, but we can terminate it with 30 days' notice. So you could tell every tenant on the airport, you have 30 days' notice to accept this new agreement as it's been approved by
Okay.
legal, or you're out. We're canceling your lease, you have the option of renewing per these terms, or you're out.
and just to be clarified, we do have mechanisms for the tenants that don't have flyable aircraft. There's several, so we wouldn't even necessarily need the language for that. Could the language make it easier? Possibly. Possibly. I will say that process is extremely time-consuming and may not get the results we want. I think as far as the hangar allocation policy, there could be some language put in there, kind of the best practices, to kind of help guide staff as we try to best enforce this. But as far as the hangar agreement specifically, it's definitely something we could put on the list of changes to make in the future. We just have to be very careful. That language, I think, would be great for the hangar allocation policy ad hoc to maybe come with some of that language. Because from time to time, the city attorney's office will change our agreements. There's new language that needs to be added due to new requirements, usually state, federal requirements. So that'd be a great time to address it. But as far as the mechanism, we do have existing mechanisms that could help us.
In that instance that I'm trying to understand how you make the changes, that there's state, federal, whatever regulations or things needs to happen. Is it done, as Commissioner Dietrich said, that you cancel 30-day and give them the new, or how was that accomplished, I guess, with those?
Oh, to replace one with another?
Yes.
We can, since almost all the agreements are month to month, we can ask them at any time and they can refuse, and we can say, well, we need a new agreement or we'll have to terminate the existing one. It's pretty easy to do. And I would say most tenants are fine with that. They're fine to get a new agreement. I think everybody wants the most recent version of anything unless they somehow feel that they had more ability rights, something before, but almost all the agreements are the same in that regard, so.
Well, I would guess those 4 sites that when they get the notice, and I guess that you would point out that, here's the changes, the only changes is section 19 or whatever it is, and they read section 19 and says, oh, you're probably not, I guess that's the writing on the wall for them, I guess.
Well, I guess we have 2 things here, right? We have the hangar allocation policy, and then we have the licenses. And I understand that it's obviously going to be a lot more difficult to add some official language to the license agreement. And I don't know that we need to do that right now, but I guess there's nothing stopping us from putting a section in the allocation policy similar to what we have for the executive hangars that, they're primarily for the storage of, turbine aircraft. I mean, I guess we could adopt the language from that FAA document that I'll have to find that basically states in here that the primary purpose for, aircraft hangars are for the storage of active aircraft, not the indefinite storage of inactive aircraft. Just as kind of a shoe in to, if we need to later down the road add some exact wording as far as, specific airworthiness requirements, annual inspection, something like that. We could always do that later down the road if it becomes a real problem. I don't think it's a big enough problem now that we need to go through all that trouble, but it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to at least put it in writing here that really what the intent is, and that, somebody that's not in compliance currently and doesn't really plan on getting into compliance, that, maybe they should consider, seeking alternative arrangements.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I've never registered an aircraft, but that registration process is separate from the airworthiness certificate,
It is,
correct?
yeah.
So one requirement could be just to make sure that that aircraft was still registered, because that is one that does trip some folks up.
Yeah, I mean, the registration process is so easy that anybody could do that.
So if somebody's not willing to register their aircraft, that might be one way to say, well, it doesn't sound like you're interested even in trying to do
Yeah,
this
and
thing.
$5 for 7 years can fix that problem. I think the bigger issue really is the airworthiness is probably going to be the highest bar to pass there.
Because you don't need an annual to keep your registration.
No,
So, I mean, it's like you can do a planned non-op on your car. That's kind of the same thing. You're doing a non-op on your plane. You're just doing the registration and not, so it's not an airworthy status.
The secondary purpose of that for our staff would be that the FAA has really stepped up efforts for airports to register all aircraft in their database. It's not something that some airports, especially smaller airports, have not always done well. We obviously have our own internal records, but we don't publish that externally to anyone other than the county. FAA has changed that now. They're expecting every single airport to register the owner and the aircraft to that airport. We can't do that unless the aircraft has current registration. It won't allow you to do it. So that's the other side of it too, is we need to have every aircraft on the airfield registered with the FAA with current registration.
Well, so then as we talk about making changes, that's going to be a requirement you're going to have to put into the lease agreement. Maybe it's actually a good opportunity to go ahead and, if you're going to have to make that change, because that's going to be a requirement that the FAA is going to require, why don't we
It might as well be done at once.
do it at once and get something in there? So it's section 19 and 20 that they need to look at. But just a thought, instead of doing, if we can get it done in a reasonable fashion, a reasonable time.
I'll inquire if there's any plans to do changes to the agreements over the next year. Maybe we can sync that up with the process. I don't think we would want to do that outside of that process because it's going to be a lot more work. But we can put some requests in early. Would help with that is having the exact language, which is maybe something that ad hoc could come up with, not only for the hangar, possibly for the hangar allocation policy, but also the license itself. If there was some language that maybe even one section that could encompass both those ideas in one.
Okay, so yeah, I guess we could look at that and try to get both those items taken care of, and then bring them back.
Yeah, so we'll try to get back on the January.
Okay.
With maybe a first pass, at least some language or something, maybe some examples from some of the other
Other airports.
airports.
And then in the meantime, assuming that, we're at capacity, and if there's still demand, is it possible to potentially reach out to a couple of these tenants that currently have aircraft, just to kind of keep in touch and see what their plans are, and see if, maybe, they'd be considering moving out in order to make some space.
Yeah, at a minimum, we can make contact with all of the ones that I'm aware of. We've made contact with one. This aircraft has not flown for a long time, has fallen out of FAA registration, is stuck in some legal issues. So we're working with that tenant to kind of put benchmarks in so that they can move towards the goal of getting registered, getting the insurance to the correct level. It's not right now, and then getting the aircraft flyable. So a lot of work for that aircraft. The rest of them, we can do something similar and say, okay, what's the next step to get this airworthy? And or if they don't have, some of them, I don't know off the top of my head whether they're both registered. So that could be the first step, is just get it registered and current, and then we'll go from there.
Okay. I don't have anything else.
I don't either. Are we, looks like there was a request for a public comment. Are we able to take public comment on this?
If there's a comment card, sure. Can you fill out a comment card so we can recognize you? They're in the back, the yellow slips.
Claudia, before you do your comment, we have to have the public comments, about read, that section, please. Could you do that for me, please, Claudia?
Yes.
Thank you.
During general public comment, the public is invited to make comments on items of public interest that are within the committee or commission's subject matter jurisdiction and that are not listed on the current agenda. Public comments are limited to 3 minutes per person. Depending on the number of persons wishing to address the committee or commission, time will be allocated in equal shares totaling no more than 20 minutes.
Claudia, I apologize. This is a point of order. That was for the general public comment prior to presentations. We're at public hearings and matters of consideration. So my understanding is that comments only relevant to the current item of discussion are allowed at this time. Is that correct? Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Claudia. Mr. Millen, please.
Yes, good evening. I certainly understand what the commission is hoping to achieve with those proposals. I think my feedback is simply that keep in mind that not all aircraft that actually fly are registered. And you might, for example, also accommodate other types of aeronautical activities like drones. So the language in particular about requiring an airworthiness certificate or a registration, I think potentially could be problematic. I certainly see the value in trying to make sure that the aircraft that are utilizing those things are flying and that they're being used appropriately. So my feedback is simply to think very carefully about the language, because it could be prohibitive if you're requiring registration and or
I'll go ahead and respond to you real quick. Yeah, thank you. I did actually see the FAA came out with, and I think it was in that order, if it was at the 5090 order, that basically talked about UAV and other types of drone activities are considered aeronautical uses.
That's a notice of proposed policy change.
Okay.
The comment period closes next week. It's not been finalized.
Okay, so I know that, at least be my intent to encompass all of that, and that maybe the language could read something like for aircraft that are required to be registered, would need to be registered. But certainly if somebody wished to store an ultralight, for the purpose of aeronautical activity, that's certainly something that we'd want to encourage. So thanks for the feedback, and definitely, I think whatever we do, just take the current FAA guidance that's been changing, but it would certainly be the intent to allow home builds, drone activity, whatever the case may be, certainly take all that into consideration.
Thank you. Do any of the other commissioners have any comments, or council member, on the discussion?
On the hangar,
Yes.
whatever changes Dan has to put in front of our city our city attorney, because, and those were great public comments and suggestions tonight. We would have to run that by the city attorney. So that's just, he would have the,
Absolutely, that's understood.
yeah.
I feel like a broken record here, but I apologize for clarification on that. Is that for any changes to the license agreement itself, or would that include changes to the allocation policy?
would
Probably
just be
the
a
entire
license.
document.
Yeah, it would be the license document. So the license is the
So it
one
would just
that's,
be the legal agreement that we have with the
Yeah.
tenant, not for the guidance that the commission has provided to Dan.
But even this new information that the public commenter brought
That's-
forward, that,
There is no new information associated with that.
but
there
we
has
could
not
always
been a
ask
change made.
them for his input.
sure,
Okay,
yeah.
that's all. I'm always referring to this city attorney because I don't know the rules and regulations, and the city has a liability.
We have internal policies that we change from time to time that help staff enforce the existing rules. I think the main item tonight was the actual hangar license itself. That would be a city attorney change. To my best of my knowledge, all those changes, since they are standing license agreements, I believe those all go to council. I'm not sure. But to my best of my knowledge, those changes do get provided, I think, on part of the consent calendar.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have to say on that.
Yeah, I think the important thing is we're just in the early stages of it, starting the discussion, and we don't have anything hard, fast, and we understand there's a process, so we will adhere to it. With that, I will consider that agenda item closed and moved on to committee comment. And the first is council update.
Council update. Well, we had a very short meeting last week. It was over by 7:30. It was amazing because we started early because we thought we were going to have the overlay, but it got pulled by the applicant for the downtown, the hotel, and the areas that they were going to put in the overlay. The story pole idea got not approved. 5-2, and our public safety facility, we heard a report from the police and fire on the future site will be the fairgrounds. There's a corner over by the skate park, and so we're in the next, I think it's an RFP is the next, but we are trying to develop a master plan on what that public safety facility would look like. First putting in fire, and then adding the police, and then our for natural disasters, or OES. So that's really exciting. We also have a search out for a new police chief. There's community input requested on December 13th and December 14th. On December 13th, from 6 to 7:30 p.m. at Lucchese, you can go and give your input on what you would like to see a new police chief offer. And the next day, December 14th, from 12 to 2, you can go to Lucchese and give your input on what you would like a new police chief to hear about. The recruiter will be there, and then we also have a survey online on the city website. So we swore in our new interim police chief, Brian Miller. We're very excited, and we are, of course, hoping he throws his hat in the ring. We just did a groundbreaking for solar panels at Lucchese Park. So there's in the grass area to the west of Lucchese, right by the Miracle League Park, there's a grass area that's going to have the solar panels installed, and that will provide shade and energy for the city. We have coming up, we have some exciting things happening. We've got the urban growth boundary to look at in 2024. We're working on the general plan, which is supposed to be approved by 2025. So we have a lot of things that we're going to be busy with. And then, of course, we'll hear about the overlay. That's coming back sometime. We just don't have a date for it. So we'll be busy in 2024, but I wanted to wish everybody happy Hanukkah and Merry Christmas and all the other holidays. So we won't see you until after the new year. Thank you.
Thank you for the update. Next item is from the ad hoc subcommittee updates.
Yeah, thank
Start
you.
with you, Tom.
We haven't had a chance to meet in a bit, and one of the things that I was working on, we were considering looking at finding a way to summarize at sort of not in too much of the weed kind of detail the way we tend to get, but the budget as it's comprised of our revenues and our expenses, so people could see, the tenants and interested people could see how the budget's developed, how we administer it, how we set rates and charges and all that sort of thing. And so what I was attempting to do was to summarize that at kind of a high level so that people get a sense of the magnitude of the money that flows through the airport. And Dan was going to see if he could find why we had a couple of glitches in the spreadsheet that we got a couple months back. And I don't know if you've heard back from that, but yeah.
I have. I'll respond to it
Okay,
whenever you're ready
cool.
for me to.
It was just an accounting whoops, no big deal, but anyway, I just wanted to make sure we had all the numbers right. And then we'll summarize that, and then Nancy and I will get back together again and see how we move forward. So far, once we get that, I think we can dive deeper into the competitive rental rates in the area. And the FAA does require, as part of the grant assurances, that our rates are competitive, not exorbitant, because you will be penalized by the FAA for that. Thank you, very nice. And or AOPA, they'll come after you too. But at the same time, we can't not recover our expenses. And so one of the reasons that we wanted to make sure that we can get airworthy aircraft that are actually, you know, putting a hole in the sky once in a while, we get the additional revenue that's generated by that activity, which helps the airport too. So anyway, that's part of what we'll be looking at in the, oh my God, new year.
Thank you, Tom. Jeff, do you have any update on your twos? I mean, we discussed the one on the hangar policy, so.
Yeah, we got that pretty well hashed out tonight. I don't have anything else unless you have anything to add.
No, I don't. Commissioner Dietrich,
No, it's good to be back. Apologies for missing last month.
it's good to have you back. Thank you. So with that, we'll close that and we'll move to the item 5, which, so commissioner comments. Yes, commissioner comment. Do any of the commissioners have any comments? I don't see any hands raised, so we'll move on. Staff comment. Item 6, which is the airport manager report. Dan?
Thank you. All right, just going over the budget so far to the end of August. Just a reminder, we're a couple of months back. We generate a lot of the material for these meetings near the end of the prior month. So we started preparing all this in November. We didn't have the November numbers yet, so we always do the month prior to that. So actually, 8, that's not correct. That should say 10. So my apologies. On the actual 8/31, that should say 10/31. And I want to say my documents are correct. Okay, yes, that's a typo. So if you look at the revenue expenditure sheets, they both should show 10/31. Sorry for the typo there. It says 8/31. Good catch to whoever got that one. So far we're looking pretty good. As far as revenues, we're showing to the end of October, $708,000. And then expenditures of $935,000. And the reason for the big expenditures there is it also includes the $484,000 $500,000 principal payment and a $20,000 interest payment made in October. And since we're on that subject, I wanted to tie in with the thing that Commissioner McGaugh mentioned earlier about something we've seen, and we didn't have an explanation until recently. So every year, right around October, November, we see the payment, the 484. It's usually around $400,000 or $500,000. Principal payment goes in, and then a $40,000 or $50,000 interest payment shows up in our expenditures. And according to the Finance Department, the way they do this is that the debt service, principal, and interest do show up on the expenditure sheet. They consider the interest itself an actual expenditure, but they don't really consider the debt service payment, the principal, an expenditure. It's to pay off debt. It does show up in here. I think it's so we can sort of budget for it. So it's more of a budgetary tool. But as far as officially, they don't show these payments, the principal, as an expenditure. So that's a finance thing. So every year, that payment disappears. So when we get our final report for the end of the year, you won't see anything on the debt service principal. You just see the debt service interest. And that's how they like to do it. So that's the explanation we got from them. The depreciation, which we thought maybe the depreciation code was that they would just put in the wrong category. No, they're showing that as actual depreciation. So that may be a great conversation, a meeting at some point. I know Commissioner McGaugh, you had there was some concerns about some FAA guidance on showing depreciation for airports. And so we may need to have a special meeting at some point to discuss that.
So let me ask,
Yeah.
So if the principal is not considered an expenditure of revenue, which we generate,
They show it as a
Where does it go?
balance sheet entry is what they're calling
It's
it.
the,
Say again?
if I may, it's the difference between an expense and an expenditure.
No,
So
I
an expenditure
understand.
is cash moving through the system.
Right.
That would be double entered against the reduction in liability on the principal of that loan. So it would not be an expense,
okay,
right? Because it's off on the balance sheet for the airport,
Sure.
there's a line that has that
Understand.
liability. That would come off of that liability. So the
Okay.
cash flow is offset by that
okay.
reduction in liability. So it's an expenditure from a cash flow perspective, which is what we have in this
Right.
printout, but it is not an expense.
But it still comes out of the revenue we generate.
It comes out of the cash that comes into the airport, but
Right.
since it's not an expense, it doesn't get offset from revenue from a profit perspective. It gets offset as a different type of asset in that we aren't holding the cash. We now have that much more equity in the hangar.
Yeah, I just know that when I was paying my mortgage, the principal came out on my checkbook. So anyway,
Right, but that came out of your cash asset allocation, not out of your taxable income as, you only get to deduct your interest, right?
okay, the only reason I was a little frustrated or questioned this was that it could make the amount of revenue generated into the airport as opposed to all of the either liabilities and expenditures not come out accurate, or at least appear accurate at the end of the year, unless it's somehow attributed to the airport, because,
Yeah, I guess a follow-up question for finance would be then, is it that the money is, it's basically just showing going straight from the account to pay off that debt, and yes, it passes through our report, but it doesn't really show as like an operating income, I think, or operating expense. I think that's the main point there, is they don't want to show it
Exactly.
ultimately as an operating
because it
expense.
could end up making us look a lot more cash positive at the end of the year than in fact it would be if that was taken into account.
Can't speak to that.
Okay.
But, so that's the mechanics they're using. Now, I like it because we at least can see it when it comes in. I think follow-up conversation, maybe with finance, would be the depreciation part.
Yeah.
But
If you'd like
those are
me
two
to
separate
be
things.
part of a follow-up conversation, I'm happy to do that as well.
Okay,
This-
no,
this
that'd be-
aligns very nicely with
That'd be
what I would have
good,
expected
because
to be done.
I recall
but
a number of
appreciate the
years ago
concern.
now, a multi-generation ago city manager, when I met with him about budget and planning things going forward, I walked into his office and he got on me, why isn't the airport paying their bills? And I, what? And he said this. And I thought, that's depreciation. That's an accounting charge against the asset value over time. That's not a cash expenditure. He didn't know that. And so, little education going on there. So anyway, that's why I'm a little
I
sensitive
hope
to
that
that.
helps a little bit, at least not to answer all the questions, but at least it guides us towards maybe other questions to ask. And
Yeah, okay,
yeah,
okay.
I will say that I wish every CCB in the city was as focused on budgets as this airport commission is. So it's great. We like the scrutiny, so it's good.
Okay, thank you.
Just as far as anything else on budget before I move on to operations? As far as airfield access, just a recap, last meeting, the airport commission passed a request, recommendation to provide a 90-day access to non-tenant aircraft on a trial basis. That has been pushed up to the city attorney's office and the risk management department, who we now have a new risk manager who's running that department, and it's being reviewed. And so they've heard the request. They are targeting that 90 days to see what it would take for not only for the city to be comfortable with that, but also if whatever we come up with, that the FAA is also accepts our plan moving forward. So I don't have anything for you today as far as a decision on that, but just to say we are actively working on this. We had a meeting even today on it, and we are moving this forward as fast as we can. Any questions on that? Okay. Any operations items before we move on? That's all I had. Just a few updates here. We announced a little while back that we received the funding for both Taxiway Alpha reconstruction and the Taxi Lane Bravo reconstruction design projects. Right now, what we're doing the survey, I believe, is complete, and now we are doing coring and boring to determine the strength and layering of those taxiways and taxi lanes to see what we're dealing with to help build in the design, plan for design, and also help us with budgeting too, to know how much work it's going to take to repair those two surfaces. So that's where we are right now. So once that's completed, there's going to be several closures over the next couple weeks to complete that. Next week there's two days of closures. That's kind of a 2 hours per section. So we'll probably put a notice out early next week, but Thursday, Friday, there are some rolling closures of Taxiway Alpha to complete that work. And those are already notamed out. But there should be very little impact. We're trying to get them to do the Alpha 5 2-night run-up area first at the beginning of the day when it's foggy, when everybody doesn't want to fly. So we're trying to prioritize that area. That way they can move further northwest and we don't delay anybody or cause minimal disruption to the airport. Let's see here. We are going through our the CIP budget process right now. We do have the Field Farm rehab on that for 2025. So that would be the fiscal year starting July 1st, going through to June 30th, 2025. The current plan is to get a design for this work. It's not, at one point we thought we could do it in-house, even though it's fairly straightforward and simple, the items for the Field Farm rehab. It sounds like the engineering department would like to get someone, an outside consultant, to do the design for that. So we're working on that to get that set up for this coming new fiscal year. That will allow us to put out to bid, and then we can have a contractor come in and do the work. Currently, we only know about 3 contractors in the whole state that would be willing to mobilize to do that work for us. It would be Tank rehabbing the tank, cleaning inside, sandblasting, resealing, some pump work, some float work, some upgrades. But that would be some kind of long-term maintenance for the field farm to make sure it still functions for another decade to go. Update on, let's see, Hanger Road 2. We have a agreement finally routing for design. So for Hanger Road 2 to Lima repair, we do have an agreement routing right now. It should be executed, I would imagine, by the end of next week. And from there, that structural engineering firm will provide the bid documents we need with the full design so that we can get that project out to bid as quickly as possible and get that work done. As far as the hangar door, we do have that payment processing. I think it was approved on the 27th officially internally as far as the check release. So the manufacturer should be receiving that within about a week or so for the purchase of the door, and we're still working on contractor to install. I don't have any date for that. My guess would be maybe early summer, late spring, early summer before we get that door, probably at best. We do have some center line marking and whole bar marking work coming up based on some of the some recent inspections with Caltrans. They want us to get some of those repainted, so we're working on that. The thing that's holding that up is the crack sealing. Some of those areas have a lot of cracks, and so we don't want to paint with glass beads when there's large cracks nearby, because then the glass beads go into the cracks, and then when you come up on that whole bar at night, it's just, you've got all these glass beads all over the place, and it kind of ruins the whole purpose of the reflectivity. So anyway, so we got a crack seal coming, and then taxi we center line, and then our own staff will most likely start working on whole bar repainting. I don't know if you noticed, but our blast pads with the chevrons are brand new paint. They look really good. I don't know if anybody noticed, but they were looking a little sad, so they're nice and got nice new yellow paint. That's all I have for active projects. Any questions about project related, either CIP or non-CIP?
Yeah, I have one question. It's a little, I should have maybe asked you this a little earlier, but I'm wondering if you've heard anything from the Airports District Office regarding the minimum commercial standards that we sent to them a while back?
Yes, we are actually finally getting traction on this. They did ask for a little. They did like the draft that we sent them, at least from the Part 13 office. They liked it. They just wanted a little additional language for kind of a catch-all for situations where a aircraft owner has no options. They really wanted something just to kind of catch the unique case. And so we're putting some language together for that. But overall, we got some great feedback. It's still going to kick back to the local ADO office for review. But as far as the compliance officer that's handling our Part 13, we got some great feedback. They like the changes. They like the diversification of some of the categories, and from their initial review, there weren't any big red
sense of a
flags.
timeline or
Timeline?
schedule on this at this point?
As soon as we get it back to them, we're working on it. As soon as we get it back to them, I would imagine a couple of weeks, and then it gets kicked to the local office. I don't know, maybe a month after we get it back to them.
Okay. So we'd get something back to do a final review and then propose that on to council, is that? what
Yes, it
we're
would
doing?
then be just double checked by city attorney's office, and then go
Sure.
to council for review.
Okay, great, thank you.
Any other questions about projects?
Yeah, I have a question, and I'm not trying to start a whole huge packet of work, but with the emergency power backup and the interest in renewable fuel options and other sort of green considerations with that, it seems to me that might be a nice time to start considering in earnest electrification of the airport in general, so charging capabilities for electric aircraft, setting us up for sort of AAM, UAS capabilities going forward. What's the best way to sort of begin tying those conversations together? Or do you feel like there's a better way to have that conversation outside of this context?
No, that's great. It very much sums up kind of where we're at with this. Our site was evaluated as part of one, I think, of multiple electrification projects where chargers would go in. There's a couple different ones. I think one is focused on public charging, and the other one is internal charging. Even if there were public chargers, I'm sure if we were to get electric vehicles, they could take advantage of those. But we did submit, I believe it was 3 locations at the airport for up to 4 chargers, I believe. Minimum of probably 1 that we would need to move forward with to buying electric vehicles, ideally 2. So we have some locations for that. So yes, that is all part of the same process. I think part of the design for the power backup would be able to support the 1 or 2 chargers. That way we wouldn't be without vehicles should there be a major shutdown. So I think that's the other intent. So we're kind of different pieces that are coming together. I think we're going to hold off on any vehicle purchase until we can get those chargers. But we're hoping to get that as part of a different grant and project. It's not necessarily airport, but it's one that's going to be a citywide project.
Makes sense. I'm also thinking about, in addition to the airport ground vehicles, I'm also thinking about aircraft themselves. And there's some really interesting conversations starting to happen around utilizing airport facilities as microgrid energy backups and renewables buffering locations for their surrounding community microgrid. And I just think there's a really interesting conversation. It's not really my wheelhouse. I'm connected to those conversations in other ways, but I guess I'm just trying, if there's interest in trying to get smart about some of those other opportunities more on the aviation side, I'd be happy to try to figure out how we could do that as a group. But it strikes me that doing some sort of significant work with the power backup facility, like that's a great opportunity to like also add battery backups for renewable energy buffering, or also add electric aircraft charging capabilities, like while you're playing with high voltage. If there's appetite for that, then maybe we could put that on a future agenda item and talk about that further. But
Yeah, very, very early days on these sort of things, but I think one idea that was floated by not one, but several tenants and even former commissioners was shade tree, shade hanger. Basically, what am I looking for? A shade, the hanger is not a full hanger, it's just a, is there a term for them though?
Yeah, it's
Shades.
basically
Shade
shade
hangers?
hanger.
Yeah,
It's a
shade hangers
roof,
maybe.
Basically.
Sorry.
with
It's
solar,
been a really long day.
Yeah.
Initially, when we looked at something like that, the cost seemed prohibitive based on the rent you would get. But now with this other component of the solar, you see all these carports with the solar shades. That's something we've been talking to a couple people about a possibility of doing that, because that could offset some of the cost if we were to get some grant funding with that, but also could provide, I guess the question is, how much power can you get from those? How many aircraft chargers could be provided? Obviously, if you have a whole row of shade hangers, you can't charge all the aircraft at once. There would have to be like limited to certain stalls, but I think it's all possible, especially if we were to tie in the main emergency electrical power circuit to those as a backup. That could be a possibility. I think that's a great step towards electrifying. The thing we probably want to avoid whenever possible is modifying existing facilities. It just gets so expensive, and what you end up with is never exactly what you wanted. So it's kind of unhappy from both sides. So something new, obviously new hangers would come with probably some charging possibilities, but the shade could be a much easier option, especially if we started out and it was standalone. If it had its own battery, had its own solar panels, it wasn't something we had to put on the grid, that could even be exciting too. Like I said, this is very early days. We don't have any engineering to back this up, but that is one possibility that could start getting us towards that charging aircraft goal.
Great. Yeah, I'd just like to see it part of the conversation as we start to think about these things more, for sure. Thanks.
If I could express it, you might want to check in with the Parks and Recs department and see who they're using for, like I said, we just had the groundbreaking for the Lucchese, and we've already got it out at the new Washington Street community playfield. So we've got some other locations. I think they're even doing it at the water sewer treatment plant. So the city is trying to go in that direction, and they have a company that's, I think they're local, that came in as the low bidder and that they're working with. So check with the Parks and Recs, because that's the future as
Yes.
Petaluma wants it to go. So
I think part of the challenge for the airport is that we are limited by the airport fund unless the city council was to provide general funding for some of these projects. It tends to have to come from the airport fund itself, which, as you can see from our numbers, it's not huge. And so that's always one of our challenges is, and I think we already would have had several solar arrays with battery. The problem is the cost is so high for such a small fund. Now, with grant funding, it makes it a lot easier, but not having access, or at least regular infusion of general funds, which we're very proud to be separate from the general fund, self-sustaining, but it also, I guess the challenge is then when these big projects come up, which we would love to green the airport even more than it already is with our offsets that we already have, it just becomes extremely expensive and at the scale that we're at, because we're so small that even though the projects are pretty small, the energy storage is just so expensive that it hits us pretty heavily in our CIP budget. So there is some federal funding for some of this, and that could be a route that we take.
That's what I was just gonna
yes.
mention, is
Yeah.
that especially with the advanced air mobility angle to it, there might be some unlocks there for some additional.
Humboldt Airport is a great example. They were able to get, I think it was at least, I want to say high sevens, maybe even 8 digits for some of their projects that they did. So there are funds for it. And just sometimes it comes down to what's the higher priority. Sometimes keeping the runway paved obviously falls in the higher category. We do want to get to their stuff, but when we have pavement areas that need paving, it's hard to juggle those. So yeah, we're always looking to options. And if you know any other grants that we may have missed,
and I don't know, because this was actually approved by the prior council.
Okay.
Because the prior council members were there that were really pushing this to go forward.
Yes.
And you can see how long a project takes. So it's been over 1.5 years, and I don't know how it was funded, but we might be able to help you there.
Thank you.
But look into it.
Yes,
I'm
we will.
not sure what the next budget looks like.
Okay.
But there's probably something.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Has the city planned any energy storage with these new solar panels?
That's a good question. I do not know the answer. I would think that the city probably uses more than they're going to generate. They're running all of those lights at Lucchese Field, all of the community center lights, the Miracle League. So, and then of course the water sewer treatment plant probably uses a huge electrical. So I don't know if they'll have enough extra storage.
Not good during solar.
Pardon?
All the lighting cannot be generated with solar power because it's lighting.
Well,
has to be
that part is, it offsets. I don't know how it all works. The younger generation knows more than I do.
I think that's getting at the heart of my question for building out this power backup, is that when the sun is shining, you're not using the demand. So it requires buffering somewhere in the grid.
Right.
And if we can do that buffering locally, that has large advantages for us. So that's part of the conversation that I want to have.
Yeah, well,
Because, when the lights are on, you're not generating solar power. That's 100%
PG&E
true.
is working on energy storage, right?
Yeah, that's been a whole
Well,
other
that's the lithium battery
conversation that I don't want
storage.
to, I don't want to
outside
get
of-
into that right now, because that's a
Yeah.
whole other meeting. But, yeah.
That's actually the Board of Supervisors, the lithium batteries. We're in this sphere of influence. The airport's a really big factor in that because there's 2 locations for the lithium battery storage at the PG&E, at Freitas and Old Adobe.
And just to clarify, the airport has already offset most of our power usage with a existing solar contract in a nearby site over by the new ball fields. So some of those solar panels are feeding into credits that we get. So even though they're not on our site because it's a adjacent site, we qualify for those credits. So we are offsetting already the great majority of our power usage. We did reserve a little of our power usage for a future greening project, which we want to eventually get to. But yeah, most of the power, to my best of my knowledge, what I've been told, is being offset right now with solar.
That's good to know. Thanks.
Any other items for projects? Okay, that concludes my comments.
Dan, are you finished your? I am. Okay. So with Dan's final comments, we get to the end of the meeting. It is now, if anyone has any comments, it's now 7:45. I will go ahead and adjourn. 7:15. I'm in one of those time zones.